So the video today that we're doing or discussing is in regards to the options for home financing. So the two active home financing options that we have as of now for Lynville Land Development Corporation is Pag-IBIG financing and also our deferred payment system or cash payment system that we call in-house payment. So let's first discuss Pag-IBIG financing. Now, Pag-IBIG financing is supported by Pag-IBIG or the Home Development Mutual Fund. It allows the buyer to borrow up to 6 million pesos under very low rates and at the friendliest terms. This is open for locally employed, self-employed, and OFWs up to the age of 65 years old. So, ano yung general Pag-IBIG qualifications na kailangan natin? So, paano natin malalaman kung tayo ay qualified for a Pag-IBIG loan? Now, first of all, of course, kailangan maging Pag-IBIG members tayo. So, as we can see here, Pag-IBIG membership, A, must be a member under Pag-IBIG, one membership program, for at least 24 months, as evidenced by the remittance of at least 24 membership savings or MS at the time of loan application. A new member who wishes to apply for a housing loan shall be required to pay in lump sum the required 24 months. So kung hindi pa tayo member for 24 months, we can always pay a lump sum of 24 months or kung ilang buwan man ang kulang sa 24 months. Similarly, a member with less than 24 months may pay his MS for the lacking months, as I've mentioned before. For both cases, the lump sum payment shall be based on the MS that correspond to the loan amount paid for or applied for. For OFWs, the Pag-IBIG Overseas Program or POP-MS exists, which allows the merging of their previous MS while working in the Philippines and the new MS from their overseas jobs. So kung ang ating client ay 1 year nagtrabaho dito sa Pilipinas at 1 year nagtrabaho sa kanyang pinagtatrabahuhan overseas, then that will constitute to a 24-month membership with Pag-IBIG, which will make our client eligible. So not more than 65 years old. So meron tayong age limit, guys, ha? Not more than 65 years old at the date of loan application and must be insurable. Medical insurance, okay? So also, at the same time, dapat not more than 68 years old at loan term. So, ano ibig sabihin po nito? At the time of loan, ang ating client ay kailangan no more than 65 years old. At pag natapos yung kanyang loan, ay hanggang 68 years old lang po yung ating maximum. So, kunwari, 65 years old pong ating client, ano yung maximum term na pwede niyang i-apply? So, obviously, meron siyang 66 years old, 67 at 68 years old na pwede niyang bayaran yung kanyang loan. So that's only 3 years. So the older the client gets, the lesser the length of the loan term na pwede niyang applyan sa Pag-IBIG. Now, number 3, no previous Pag-IBIG housing account that was foreclosed, canceled, or bought back due to default. This may also mean that they are not blacklisted. So, ano pong ibig sabihin ng blacklisted sa Pag-IBIG? So kung sila ay merong previous loan na hindi nababayaran, they will be automatically blacklisted. So there may be other reasons for a blacklisting sa Pag-IBIG. So let's just check po kung ating client, for any reason whatsoever, ay blacklisted or merong unpaid balances. Number 4, can provide all Pag-IBIG home loan requirements. So ano ang Pag-IBIG home loan requirements? This will be the bulk of our discussion today. Pag-IBIG home loan requirements. So first, let's discuss the basic requirements needed for a Pag-IBIG home loan. So ito yung parang common denominator ng tatlong iba't ibang klaseng home loan applicant na pwedeng kumuha ng bahay dito sa Lynville. So ito yung self-employed, ito yung locally employed, at ito yung OFW. So lahat sila ay kailangan mag-submit ng mga requirements na ito para sila ay makakuha ng isang approved home loan with Pag-IBIG. So, the first that we need is a 1x1 picture. So, 6 copies po ito, not scanned, front-facing, no selfies or Facebook pictures na kinonvert into a 1x1 photo, at kailangan white background. So, para sure lang tayo sa klase ng 1x1 photo, it is best na pumunta na lang sila sa isang photo center or isang shop na gumagawa ng mga ID photos. The next requirement that we need is a marriage contract if married. Please ensure that The name of the spouses and birth date must be matched on the presented IDs. Photocopy is obviously accepted. Local civil registry copy is accepted. Now, the next requirement that we need is a birth certificate. Again, we are allowing for a photocopy. It is also accepted. And then at the same time, yung buyer's name and birth date must match the presented IDs. Local civil registry copy is obviously accepted. Photocopy of passport or original copy of birth certificate as an alternative for blurred and unreadable birth certificates are accepted. Death certificate of spouse, number 4. So, obviously, kung ang ating buyer or ang ating client is a widow or widower, we will need a death certificate. The spouse name must be correct, and a photocopy is also accepted. Number 5, kung ang client natin is separated or annulled, we would need a court order or proof of voided marriage. This must be provided if the client is legally separated by annulment or divorce. Name of spouses must be correct. Note, if the client was married overseas to a non-Filipino, the buyer is no longer required to prove that they are divorced. However, if the buyer's former spouse is a former Filipino citizen or has one or both parents who are former or current Filipino citizens, the buyer's spouse shall be considered a Filipino. Therefore, a proof of divorce or annulment must be provided by the buyer if they are separated. So kung ating buyer, ang kanyang spouse ay talagang full-blooded foreigner, has nothing to do with the Philippines by birth or by residence, then the buyer's spouse will be considered a foreigner, and if they were married overseas especially, then there is no need to provide the proof of divorce. Pero kung ang ating client is married to a Filipino by birth, by ethnicity, by parents, or by former or current residents here in the Philippines, kailangan po natin talaga ng proof of divorce or annulment. So, obviously, kung dito sa Philippines yon, it will be an annulment. There is no divorce here in the Philippines. However, if they were divorced overseas, or maybe even annulled overseas, they will have to provide those documents. Also, a marriage contract with a null or void pursuant. So I think this is more applicable to our clients who are annulled because as we know, dito sa Philippines, hindi legal ang divorce, pero ang annulment is acceptable or is the accepted way of actually separating a married couple legally. So itong marriage contract with null or void, it is a product of the annulment of a marriage contract. So it's as if it never existed. Number 6, we need 2 valid IDs. And by valid, what do we mean? Generally, a valid ID must have the buyer's picture, signature, and must be government issued. So tatlo po yan. So what is the list of generally accepted valid IDs? Number 1, company ID. This is only valid for Pag-IBIG housing loan applications only. If you're required to submit at least 2 valid government IDs, then a company ID does not fill that spot. Kailangan nyo pa rin magbigay ng pangalawang valid government ID. Passport issued by the Philippine or foreign government. Driver's license. Professional Regulation Commission ID or PRC ID. Social Security System Card or SSS. Government Service Insurance System or GSIS e-card. Government Office and GOCC ID. Kunwari, mga AFP ID or Pag-IBIG Loyalty Card, etc. Integrated Bar of the Philippines, IBP ID. Senior Citizen Card. Overseas Workers Welfare Administration or OWA ID. Overseas Filipino Worker ID or OFW ID. Seafarers Identification and Record Book or SIRB. Postal ID, Voters ID. So some people have been asking kung accepted ang national ID. Sa ngayon ay hindi dahil wala itong signature ng ating client. So at the moment, yes, we know that there is a move by the Duterte administration to say that this should be allowable to be used as a valid ID. However, this is not our requirement. This is the requirement of Pag-IBIG. And a national ID is lacking in the part where kailangan ng may signature ng ng buyer or ng client. So at the moment, the national ID will not be accepted as a valid form of ID in terms of applying for a home loan for Pag-IBIG. Now let me repeat, this is not our requirement. We just want to make sure that the requirement of Pag-IBIG for a valid ID is followed. Next, buyer's name and birth date must match with the presented birth certificate and marriage contract. Must attach 3 specimen signatures to the copy of the ID. So every time magsasubmit kayo ng photocopy ng inyong valid ID, you will have to attach 3 specimen signatures to the copy of your ID. The next requirement is spouse ID. So just like with the buyer's ID, it's the same qualification. So to get a valid ID, we must have the spouse's picture, the spouse's signature, and it must be government issued. So I won't enumerate anymore yung ating mga examples because I've already done so. Now, just to ensure, the buyer's spouse's name and birth date must match with the presented marriage contract. Must attach 3 specimen signatures to the copy of the ID and must be in the married name kung babae po ang ating spouse. And that goes for the same with the buyer's ID. The buyer or the spouse or the co-borrower or whoever is required to present an ID, we must make sure na married name na po ang ginagamit. And at the same time, we should also ensure that all of the documents match. Birth dates, names, spellings. Dapat lahat po yan nagmamatch sa lahat ng documents moving forward. Now, take note, we don't really require a married name at all times. Meron naman siyang 6 months validation. So, if you were married within 6 months of your home loan application, which will happen pag tapos na yung bahay, then that is still acceptable. However, most of the time, pag nagre-reserve po yung client, it's normally 6 months after the reservation kung kailan matatapos yung bahay. So it would be much safer to just provide IDs or identification or any documents all in the applicant's married name. The applicant, the spouse, and all the co-borrowers involved. Next, if there's any mismatch with the name on any of the IDs or any of the documents, we must execute what is called an affidavit of 2 disinterested persons. Now, this must be provided if a discrepancy was found on the submitted requirements, such as mismatched names on IDs, birth certificates, marriage contracts, and death certificates. Information with discrepancy must be stated completely and correctly, must be original and notarized, must have complete details and signatures of the affiant. Now, it can be avoided. Di na natin kailangan magbigay ng isang affidavit of 2 disinterested persons kung meron na tayong matching information on all the requirements submitted. However, minsan talaga hindi maiwasan na merong mismatch. It's not really the fault of the person submitting the requirements. Sometimes it's a mistake in the part of the issuer, kung ano man department ng government ang nag-issue. However, don't worry kasi the affidavit of 2 disinterested persons is a way for us to correct that. So, if talagang wala tayong makita na matching ang lahat na ID and requirements, we can still execute this. Of course, it would be much easier kung hindi na natin kailangan mag-execute ng affidavit dahil matching na lahat. Next, letter for non-relative co-borrower. So sometimes we have co-borrowers that are not related, and that's fine. All we need is a letter for non-relative co-borrower. So this must be provided if the co-borrower did not fall under the 1st to 2nd degree of affinity or consanguinity. Must have the complete name and signature of the principal borrower and co-borrower. Number 10, we need a verified BIR 1904 form or TIN verification slip. Must have the correct TIN number and must be filled out correctly and verified by the BIR. So number 11, MSVS or Membership Status Verification Slip. So this is a very specific document that is required by Pag-IBIG. So this particular requirement is to prove na talagang member ang ating client for at least 24 months. If we recall, dun sa simula ng ating video, isa sa mga requirements para makapag-apply ng isang home loan is to be a member of Pag-IBIG for the last 24 months at the very least. So kung gano'n, ang MSVS ang parang patunay na siya nga ay more than 24 months member na sa Pag-IBIG para siya ay maging eligible for a housing loan. So this must be filled out correctly and complete, including the old employer if meron man. It has a 6 months validity. So kung kayo ay nag-submit ng 6 months after your reservation, kaso yung inyong bahay ay matatapos more than 6 months, so ito ay expired na. So we have to provide another. 1905 BIR Form for updating and correction of buyer's information with the BIR. Number 12, we need to provide a Pag-IBIG borrower's validation. So this is a proof of joining or being part or taking part in the Pag-IBIG validation seminar. So ano yung Pag-IBIG validation seminar? Ito yung i-discuss nila lahat ng details tungkol sa loan na ina-apply ninyo or ina-apply ng inyong client. Number 13, Certificate of Pag-IBIG contribution. This requirement is now optional. However, it can really help kung unclear yung information dun sa MSVS. It could work as a really good supplementary document or supporting document for the client's 24-month membership or more. Health Statement Form. A health statement form is required if the selling price or loanable amount reaches the amount of 2 million pesos. So for some units that are at 2 million pesos selling price, we need a health statement form. Now, another situation where a health statement form is also needed is if the buyer is 60 years old and over. Obviously, we do not allow people who are 65 years old and over to take a loan. So we do consider this need for people that are 60 years old to 65 years old. Kailangan na po mag-submit ng kanilang health statement form with a attachment of a medical certificate with laboratory results if needed. HR or employer valid contact details for advanced credit investigation of Lynville staff and of Pag-IBIG.